After the extreme heat of last year, I decided this year to plant high-yield, heat-tolerant plants. And now that they've begun to grow, it made sense to show you how well my plan is going so far. First up is the roselle. These plants are light sensitive and won't start producing fruit until the days start getting shorter. So for now, the goal is to get them to grow as big as possible to produce plenty of the calyxes I plan to use to make teas and jam. I wasn't certain how well they would grow, so I planted lots of them to make sure I got at least 1 or 2 good plants. To my surprise, they all germinated. With that result, I developed a plan to grow them as a hedge near the patio sitting area. One front-facing bed was a little low on soil, so I needed to add extra, so the planned hedge would be the same height. The suggestion is to grow them about 3 feet apart. And as I dug them up, I understood why. Their roots spread. The hedge roselle are going to be a little tighter, at about 1.5 feet, so I had to do what I had to do. With that done, I moved some into the side bed of the sitting area. I was able to give them plenty of distance. The only problem was that Sunny Girl seemed to like lying on the transplanted seedlings. After planting that area, I still had 4 plants left and decided to just throw them in the ground near the fence, as roselle isn't picky about soil. Once again, my helper returned to lay on the plants. I got them done, and now they will have to do the work of growing in between the weeds. And on to the tomatoes. I still have a few boxcar willy tomato seedlings that I'll succession plant later. I've gone with 2 beds of tomatoes. One of the 2 beds is in partial shade most of the day, with afternoon shade later, and those plants have thrived. The second bed gets full sun most of the day, with afternoon shade like the first, and is growing well, but is not as dark green as the first one. We'll see what happens going forward. This bed previously had sweet peas, and I've succession planted boxcar willy tomatoes there as well. So as the sweet peas die off, they will have added nitrogen to the soil so the tomatoes can take over. The okra that loves the heat is also doing well. I've planted them in 2 locations about 3 weeks apart. They have really responded to the heat and were trying to put out fruit while they were still small, so I cut off these early pods to let the plants focus just on growing. Despite seeming to do nothing for a while, the Seminole pumpkins have come to life. They really seem to enjoy the heat, and one is even beginning to vine. This is exactly what I want them to do, because later I plan to put in supports to my existing frame to make a pumpkin tunnel, to do double duty by vining to make pumpkins and also provide partial shade for the 2 long beds. So this is something to watch over time. Then there are the yard-long beans. They took a while to begin to grow, but now are attaching to the string I put up. As they have begun to climb, they too have put out flowers to produce beans that I have snapped off, again to allow the vines to focus on growth before producing beans. This is my first time growing these, so it has been an adventure. The loofah plants are also taking over their bed, and I've combined them with Kentucky Wonder climbing beans for support as they grow, in addition to the nitrogen they put out in the soil. I'll come back later and put in string to help them cover the trellis. Speaking of Kentucky Wonder pole beans, I have really been impressed as they have taken off in no time and covered the trellis I gave them. I've companion planted them with chili peppers, and once they reached the top of the trellis, I snapped off the tip so they would branch out to produce even more beans. I did a second makeshift trellis in the bucket bed, and it is branching out just like the first, producing lots of beans. In fact, they have worked so well compared to the regular pole beans I put in the middle of one of the long beds that I have succession planted them to overtake the regular pole beans on the small trellis. I planted 2 beds of sweet potatoes, and as I mentioned in another video, the bed where I just planted the sweet potatoes in the ground took off a lot faster than the second bed with slips. Both have done well as the warm temperatures have become consistent. It'll be interesting later in the season to see which bed produces the most sweet potatoes. I've also been pleased with the cucumber growth. Cucumbers tend to come in a quick burst and then die out. So I planted 1 round and then came back 3 weeks later and did a second round that should keep the harvest going. And now to one of my most successful projects. I overwintered this bell pepper plant and then replanted it. In no time, it has 3 peppers growing, and it's still quite healthy. I've never overwintered anything other than sweet potato vines for slips, so this worked out really well. Now that I've covered most of the heat-tolerant vegetables, it also made sense to cover some of the flowers I want to act as pollinators that can also tolerate the heat. First, if my Seminole pumpkin tunnel works out, I should have tons of flowers for pollinators. I've also put out zinnias and marigolds in the hanging planters that have been growing quickly. And then I got the idea of plants for the planters that would produce lots of flowers and come back season after season. And lantana popped into my head. I have very sandy soil around my house and wasn't able to get edge flowers to grow until I found lantana. But don't make the mistake I made after purchasing what I now know was sterile lantana and then grabbing some wild camera lantana that produces seeds that birds scatter, and it ends up everywhere. In addition, it can be poisonous to grazing animals. To stop the spread, I have to stay on top of cutting back the flowers that edge a backyard tree. I took a few stems from my tree edging, rooted some, and just pushed others in the ground. I know some of these stems look brown and dead, but lantana is almost like a zombie and can rise from what looks dead. That's how I was able to edge around the tree and the screen porch. It can live through droughts. And my final high-yield plant? A mulberry tree. For something so easy to grow, I've had a devil of a time propagating one from cuttings. I finally resorted to planting a cutting in a closed system. And here is the result. I'll wait a little longer to let the roots get fully developed and then plant it in the ground. But for now, I'm just happy to finally have an established plant. So there you have it, gang. The heat-tolerant garden has taken off, and you should get a chance to see how much I'm able to harvest as the time goes by. See you next time.